Hi, today is my great pleasure to have as a guest on the channel the brilliant Tsiporah Fried to discuss French nuclear deterrence policy and European defense integration. Tsiporah Fried, who, to be clear, is French, is a visiting senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where she works on transatlantic security, military strategy, defense innovation, and the strategic implications of emerging technologies. I met Tsiporah a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, in her capacity as senior advisor to the vice chairman of the French Joint Chiefs of Staff. She also served as a political advisor to the chief of the French Navy and led strategic dialogues with key allies. Tsiporah is a graduate of the Super Élite École Nationale d'Administration. She has a master's degree from Sciences Po and a degree in Russian language and civilization, if we could call it that, from the Institut National des Langues et des Civilisations Orientales, INACO, I believe it's often referred to. She's a Knight of the National Order of Merit and a Navy Reserve officer, member of the editorial committee of the Revue de Défense Nationale, and lots of other things. Suffice it to say, she knows a thing or two. Tsiporah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's a great pleasure to see you and a great honor to be on your podcast, which I'm a huge fan, I must say.
Thank you so much. So where I want to start with the French nuclear deterrence subject, with French nuclear deterrence. You recently published a paper with Hudson about French nuclear deterrence, in which you talked about President Emmanuel Macron's speech at the submarine base at Île Longue. And I've put a link to that article in the description for you in the audience if you want to read, and I do recommend that you read Tsiporah's article. Now, your basic thesis in this article was that Macron did not break with long-standing French nuclear policy, but reframed it in the context of current strategic developments. So I want to unpack all of this, and I think that for our viewers who I don't presume are familiar with French nuclear deterrence policy, it might be good to start with the basics. So let's start with the basics. Like, could you give us on one foot a brief overview of French nuclear policy up to this point?
Yes, with pleasure, Michael. I first would like to maybe have a preliminary remark, because I don't think that your audience knows very well about what is the meaning of French nuclear deterrence. And I would say that French nuclear deterrence is not simply a military capability. It's not simply a weapon for France. It's the foundation of our strategic autonomy, a word that you will hear often in French doctrine and language. It's also the guarantee of our sovereign decision-making process. And I would say one of the key elements that gives credibility to our international responsibilities that we assume as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. You want to understand both the definition and the concept of French nuclear deterrence that has, I would say that has been the same since its foundation. I would say two sentences to explain this. First, the capacity to inflict such severe damage on an adversary's population and economic centers that it would deter even a more powerful opponent from launching an attack regardless of its own destructive capabilities. The second sentence would be the protection of the nation's vital interests will never depend on a foreign power. So no delegation and full control, whether it is on the capacity itself or on the decision-making to launch the nuclear weapons. So I think with those two sentences, you have embraced what is French nuclear deterrence. But maybe to respond to your question, I would say a few words about the birth of French nuclear deterrence. For people who know the French history, they would think immediately of General de Gaulle, which was at that time Président de Gaulle, and who made the political decision that French sovereignty and strategic independence required an autonomous nuclear force, capacity of strike, and a force that would never be subordinated to another power. and that's what when it becomes really interesting, is that the intellectual foundations of French deterrence were developed by four remarkable military thinkers, often referred to as the les quatre généraux de l'Apocalypse, the four generals of the Apocalypse: André Beaufre, Pierre Gallois, Lucien Poirier, et Charles Ayeret. And together they built the conceptual architecture of French nuclear strategy. I would add this, that I discovered when I wrote my paper, is that they were very much engaged with the American strategic debate on nuclear deterrence at that time. And I suppose, like every strategic thinker of the nuclear age, they were all in the same community of thinking, and a very limited community, in fact. But so they were very much inspired by the work of Herman Kahn, who is the founder of the Hudson Institute, but also Bernard Brody and Thomas Schelling and others. But I would say that they didn't follow the American doctrine of nuclear deterrence. They developed really a distinctive one, the French doctrine that we have until now, and which is still, I would say, which has not really much changed. We'll see that later. But this doctrine is centered on national sovereignty, political independence, even if France was part of NATO at that time, and the credibility of an autonomous deterrence rather than the bipolar logic of the Cold War, and the parity and the mutual destruction assured.
The way you phrase it, I think, is, at least from my point of view, absolutely dead on in terms of the American thinking. Let's put it this way. American deterrence thinking has to do with polarity. It's us and them, two poles. The French thinking is entirely different, because on one hand, there's an effort to understand the polar thing. And as you said, the French thinkers were all talking to, corresponding with, debating with the Americans. So I know that there's a correspondence between Beaufre and Brody, and they were all talking together and hanging out together. But then for the French, it was always the question of, all right, what happens when you introduce into a bipolar system a third pole, a third actor who also has nuclear weapons? And then what does that do for the whole system? And that, to me, is really what distinguishes, among other things, the French versus the American, in that it's a different paradigm, because we're the third people. We're late for the party, but here we are with the third party.
The real difference between French doctrine and the American doctrine is really that this notion of deterrence from the weak to the strong, which gave the intellectual legitimacy for a small and independent nuclear forces, whatever is the environment. It's not about polarity. It's not about parity. It's really about preserving a vital strategic interest, and being independent to decide whatever it takes to protect those interests. That's it. I would not go further, because I'm not completely a specialist, and I would really recommend then to read Bruno Tertre's analysis of this doctrine. But really, I think that's the most important to understand, and also to understand this basic of idea of independence, capacity to strike, and to, I would say, to create such a damage that this damage should be deterrent by itself. And that's what is really interesting, because that's why the Macron speech in March is related to, as well as a legacy, but also a step forward, as his speech tells about it by itself.
Could you speak a little bit about this idea of the sort of the strict sufficiency as pillar of French nuclear thinking?
Yes, Michael, I think it's a very important idea. I just want to remind, and I hope that it was very clear in my paper to make understand. So it's one of the principles that are the basic of our nuclear doctrine. So you have strict sufficiency, you have independence of decision, you have operational credibility, permanent presence at sea, and strictly defensive purpose. So I think those principles are really combined and cannot be treated guarding the other. It's they are all combined to create this coherence of our doctrine. But strict sufficiency, I think it's really interesting as a concept because it's also different from the Russian or the US approach. It has never meant keeping the smallest possible arsenal. It's not what it means. It means maintaining only the capabilities necessary to ensure a credible deterrence. So France does not seek numerical parity with the US or Russia. It would have been impossible. But nor does it engage in an arms race. That is not our purpose. It's not. It's an element of power, but it's not an element for us to engage into this race. So the nuclear force, the nuclear number of warhead, is sized solely to guarantee that any potential aggressor would face an acceptable damage. It's nothing more, nothing less.
So let's fast
Yes.
forward to Macron's speech. Okay, so what
Yes.
did Macron actually do, and how is it that you said he's reframed the same policy, but in a new strategic context?
Yes, in fact, when Macron gave that speech, the questions that were raised was immediately is it a revolution in French doctrine? Are we leaving the comfortable shores of the Gaullist doctrine to get into something that is should be more adapted to the complexity of our strategic environment? So I really, it's a very difficult question, but what I really think is that we have a doctrinal evolution, but not a revolution. And when coming back to the topic of the strict efficiency, because that's also part of the Macron speech to announce a raise in the number of warhead. I would say doesn't change what I said about the logic that ground this principle. We are not getting into a new race. We are not trying to get parity with any adversary. It's still the same logic of strict efficiency, but I think it is more adapted to a strategic environment where we see that the threats are multiplying in a multipolar environment. And this idea of President Macron to increase the number of warheads is really to adapt the capacity to this world, which is marked by the renewed great power competition, with a new nuclear proliferation and the threats caused by this advance in missile defense and emerging technologies. I think, and I would go back to Admiral Pierre Vandier's book that I really recommend to read, the nuclear, the third age of nuclear deterrence. That I think I have noted it in my report, and it's really that the strategic environment has changed, and of course the way we see deterrence, the way we fear proliferation has changed too. So the announced increase in the number of warhead, which I think it's the first since early 1990s, should be understood as a capability decision rather than a doctrinal revolution. It reflects the need to preserve the credibility of deterrence in a more demanding strategic environment and not to pursue quantitative superiority. So the underlying principle remains, and there is no change in France's rejection of arms race. And the only change is really that we consider that the number of warhead has to be increased because we are in a far more dangerous strategic environment. But what is really significant, and it is more significant, I think, that the increase of the number of warhead itself, is that President Macron has ended a long-standing policy of transparency regarding the exact size of the French arsenal. So this is a much more consequential signal, the end of transparency in that. And the idea is to introduce a greater strategic ambiguity to reinforce the uncertainty that lies at the heart of deterrence itself. And that's, I think, the main point to be considered regarding the doctrinal evolution announced by President Macron. To go back to your global question on what happens on March when President Macron delivered this speech, that's my interpretation. And of course, I have discussed it with other experts to be sure that I didn't have the wrong ideas. But I mean the real takeaway from President Macron. It's not that it is a revolution in French nuclear doctrine. It's perfectly grounded into its legal Gaullist basis, but it's an evolution in the way deterrence is now integrated into European security. Well, and for this you have to be extremely careful because there are many sorts of misinterpretation on that. So you have to be extremely cautious. And first, I would say that France is neither extending its deterrence through a formal nuclear guarantee, nor it giving up its sovereign decision-making. The president was very clear. The decision to use nuclear weapons remains exclusively French. But what he proposed instead is a graduated framework to closer European integration around deterrence. And this includes structured strategic dialogue with partners, their participation in nuclear-related exercise, and enhanced cooperation on early warning, air and missile defense, and strategic planning. And this is what is a real change, is that vital interest does not concern only French vital interest anymore. And we will consider those vital interests with in a dialogue, in a constant dialogue with our partners. And I think one of the first concrete steps has been the creation of a French-German nuclear steering group, which illustrates the kind of consultation we could have with our partner. That's, I think, the main point. The second one is also important, and but I would say even more cautious because we will see how it will be implemented really. It's President Macron's willingness to consider the forward deployment of conventional weapons and even, we don't know, French nuclear-capable assets on Allied territories if the strategic context requires it. It's an evolution from the French traditionally more territorially focused posture. It doesn't change who makes the decisions to employ nuclear weapons, but again, it changed how French deterrence can contribute to European security and reassurance. I would conclude maybe on this speech and this evolution of doctrine that we should avoid overstating the significance of President Macron's proposal. We are witnessing a doctrinal evolution. We are witnessing a much more integrated European security and a French position or French role, which allows to rethink this European architecture of security. But it's not a strategic transformation, and this has directly impact on the NATO implications or also the way Washington could see this evolution.
Maybe this is a good time to pivot to the subject of European defense integration.
I
This is
just want to
sure.
maybe,
Go
Michael,
ahead.
just because we have an American audience and we're coming from we just had the summit of Ankara, so I just want also to point something that this evolution of the French doctrine and this integration of European security in our nuclear deterrence vision, I would say, it changed very little from a NATO's perspective. It does not replace the US nuclear umbrella, nor does it alters NATO's nuclear command arrangement. So the American extended deterrence guarantee remained the cornerstones of European collective defense. So I think it's very important to remind that. And French initiative has to be understood as complementary and not competitive. And it strengthens Europe's contribution to deterrence without challenging NATO's integrated nuclear architecture or the United States' indispensable role. So I think it has to be clear that Washington should really encourage Europeans to be part of it, as they encourage Europeans to assume a greater responsibility for their own defense.
That's actually remarkably consistent, I think, with what Both and Galois were arguing for, which is like they made very clear that they did not envision French nuclear capabilities to be at all a substitute or an alternative to the American. They were actually pitching it as this will help the Americans because this will actually
Exactly.
strengthen it, and also there was this idea of dialogue that they were concerned that the Americans wouldn't pay enough attention to European interests in the debate about when to use and when not to use nuclear weapons. And so the French were thinking that this is going to help us have a seat at the table so that we can talk to the Americans and be part of the conversation. And now maybe then the idea is that by talking about having more dialogue with France's European allies, then it's sort of like France is sort of saying, yeah, we're going to talk to you and bring you into the conversation so that your interests are being heard as we
Mhm.
ponder the fate of the universe.
I think it's just also being aware of what is going on and the need for European to be much more coherent, much more responsible. And I know that's the next topic. So, but it goes very well in this shift of European defense, which is not only a burden shifting.
So, okay, so now let's talk about European defense. Now, you wrote actually much more recently, I think it came out last month, a paper again with Hudson in which you wrote about European defense and European defense integration. And again, I put a link to that paper in the description of this video. You wrote that in this paper, it sounds like an accusation, you wrote, but you wrote in the paper.
Yeah, I assume what I wrote.
Yeah. So you wrote that Europe faces two imperatives. One was achieving operational readiness for high intensity war in the near term, and then the other is building strategic autonomy over the long term. Can you unpack that? Like, can you tell me sort of more about like what you mean by these two things, and also why I believe you were implying that there's a tension between the two things, which makes it hard to pull off both
Yes.
at the same time.
First, if you allow me, I would like to make
Sure.
few remarks on this topic, which is an extremely complicated one. My first remark would be why did I wrote this? Why did I write this report? Because there are a lot of reports on European rearmament, a lot of especially parliamentary reports from many different European countries, etc. But talking with my American friends and with my colleagues, etc., and even I would say talking with myself, I would I would have difficulty to understand what was going on and to make the difference between what is really done, what is ambition, what is in the current process, and what are the problems, and especially having just a point of situation of all the multiple initiatives that have been taken in the name of European rearmament. So everything was very much confused, and I thought of it since last year. I think after maybe Ursula von der Leyen general speech, etc. And I say, okay, so what it is exactly? And I find myself not being able to respond to the questions about that. So that's why I tried to really to write a paper that was not only a strategic or geopolitical report, but also just very descriptive. What do we have? What do we have in this domain? What has been done? What is what needs to be done? So it's very descriptive. That was the pre remarks, and I have three. In fact, three preliminary. First, I want, because I think this your public, your audience really doesn't know what's going on in Europe, and they cannot imagine how far we were a few years ago. I would say how far we were just since 2022. In fact. So we had 70 years of peace. And those 70 years of peace has have a huge impact, not only in the shrinking of defense budget, but also in the mind, in European mind. It was not possible to go back to a state of war after having lived 70 years in peace, enjoying that peace, I would say, under the US security umbrella. And suddenly, we had a warning in 2014 when Russia illegally annexed Crimea. But this warning was not even sufficient. In fact, it was not even sufficient. We didn't want to believe of a Russian threat. Really, the only real strategic wake up, was the invasion of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine on February 2022. Just to illustrate that, before 2022, the average of spending was about 1.3% of GDP for most of the countries. And that's true that the United States had assumed most of the defense spending through NATO. 70% of investment, 70% of spending was US. And so we were very far from the 2% NATO's goal from the Hague. And now I would say we with this wake-up call, we started to realize that there was something to be done. The second, and I'm sorry if I'm a little long, but I think it's also very important. But stop me if of course, if you think, Michael, that's not relevant to our topic. But I think we need to be very careful with the term strategic autonomy. First, strategic autonomy is really related to a state that is capable to have the whole control on the intelligence, the analysis of the situation, the decision-making process, and the action. That's not the case of the European Union. That's not the case. It has other powers, if I may say, other capacities, but it's not really those that are related to strategic autonomy. There is also a confusion. The real objective of European Union is not to be completely independent from the United States, but to be much more self-reliant, responding in that sense to Washington request, in fact, to assume more expense, more capabilities, more responsibilities. And so it's very much in accord with within NATO. I would say, speak more about self-reliance and forget the idea of strategic autonomy. The third one, and maybe it's beyond my report, but it's really something that especially the president of Hudson, John Walters, remind us very often, is that it would be unrealistic and dangerous if European rearmament would mean a complete decoupling from the United States. It's, I hear from some in the US, but also some in Europe, that there should be a real line, a frontier between Europe and US, and etc. But it's unrealistic because Europeans are very dependent on military capabilities first. We are anchored in an alliance which is deeply transatlantic. And also, we remain, I would say, key partners for the United States. And we need to see the big picture there. Our adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, are increasingly coordinate across regions. So you cannot see only one region. You have to see the global environment. And in this global environment, we cannot afford for the US to think just US and China, or for Europe to think just Europe and Russia. A strong Europe, a strong United States are not competing projects. They are really complementary pillars of a unique strategic response to this global environment. And I stop there for my preliminary remarks.
To go back to your paper, in your paper you talk about how there were structural challenges that stood in the way of Europe achieving these two mandates, achieving operational readiness and strategic autonomy, or as you put it, self-reliance. And I think we can all agree at this point that it's not money that's the problem. Europe has enough money. And at this point, Europe is now spending kind of enough money. And yet somehow the whole always ends up being less than some parts. So because there are these structural problems. Could you address them, the ones that I know you do it in the paper, but for the audience, talk about like what are these structural impediments?
Yes. So just if you allow me again, I would start first because I don't think, and we have seen that, especially with the comments on Ankara summit. It's really where we are. And I don't want to go directly to the structural problems of Europe without drafting an overview of what has been done since 2022. And so
No idea.
I just want to say that first, Europe has really entered into a decisive phase of rearmament. And this is no longer a political slogan, and this is not to satisfy Donald Trump, to make him happy. It's a strategic reality. And we have been very far before, and there are huge progress that we need to we need to emphasize on. The question is not if Europe is doing enough, because Europe has already begun a profound transformation, and that's why it is really relevant to understand why it cannot go forward because of those structural problems. But I would say that the transformation happened in 3 dimensions that I want to remind for your audience. The first is really the defense spending, because after decades of underinvestment, the European countries have started to reverse the trend, and I think we can congratulate them for that. And I told earlier about the 1.3% of GDP. Now all the allies have reached the 2% of GDP, which I think is considerable. When you see the numbers in billions for the defense budget, and just between 2024 and 2025, NATO, European allies, and Canada have increased the defense expenditure by roughly 20%. Now, most of the countries have reached the 2%. Poland is exceeding, almost reaching more than 4%, and the Baltic states are exceeding 3%. The one figure that you need to have in mind is that the global defense budget of the defense budget combined of European countries reach approximately 381 billions of euro, which is equivalent almost at the Russian budget, and which was in 2021 only 270 billions. So you see the efforts that have been made, and it's really important to underline them. Of course, Germany is a heavyweight in this, with a budget that will exceed 100 billion annually, and there was an announcement that the next budget will be around 180 billions. France has reached 2% and aim its effort towards 2.5% of GDP in 2030 and 3.5% that we expect in 2035. what I just want when I say those two figures, German and France, I also want to point out something that we tend to forget. The budget alone do not tell the whole story. A military capability is not simply a function of annual spending. And France in particular illustrates this transformation quite well, because unlike many European countries, it preserved a full spectrum military. We just saw the nuclear deterrence, the also expeditionary forces that are heavily trained, and they have operational experience that don't have much of the European countries. We have intelligence capabilities, and we have a strong blue water navy with the aircraft carrier as the flagship. And today, France has accelerated its rearmament by investing in munitions, in drones, in air and missile defense, space-based intelligence, and we have already defined our next generation capabilities with the Rafale 5. And so those capabilities cannot be measured through annual national defense expenditures. That's what I just wanted to remind. The second transformation is industrial. I think, well, we will see the problems later, but I think that we have to also to remind this because it's also a reality that we have difficulty to catch, because each time you have headlines, Thales this, MBDA this, BAE this, Leonardo and Rheinmetall, etc. So it's pieces of puzzle that we need to reconstitute. So rearmament is also the capacity of rebuilding an industrial military power at scale. And we have seen the announcement of General Secretary Rutte that the NATO foreign industry has generated almost 10 billions of order books. But what I have seen in my papers is that Europe's major defense firms have roughly right now 300 billions in order books, and government are investing heavily in production capacity. MBDA should expect to double its missile production compared with 2023. The initiative on ammunition will bring the capacity to expand to 2.4 billions of investment, and the capacity to get 2 million ammunitions, when in 2024 we were not capable, 2023 we were not capable to keep our promise to Ukraine to provide 1 million of shells, 1 million of ammunitions. So you see the difference. There is acceleration and there is a raise of production. And Rheinmetall, France Chorus program are introducing also mass production models for drone and loitering munitions. I would say Europe has understood that industrial capacity has once again become a strategic capability. And this is really the lesson from Ukraine. The deterrence is not only measured with what you have in your arsenal in terms of weapon, but how fast you can replenish them. And this is so important that we will see why also when we have blockage, it is also important to see how we can get rid of them. So, and the third transformation of Europe, which is very important, even if it is sometimes considered from outsider by symbolic as a symbolic one, it's really the change of the mindset. Defense is no longer debate that is really reserved for the specialists, the experts. I remember when I started to work in defense, and my own classmates from ENA, they didn't understand why I would go to a Minister of Defense. Why? Minister of Finance, General Direction of Treasure, Minister of Foreign Affairs, etc. But defense, why? And I would say this, you can apply this to Europe in general. Much more scary was the consideration for defense investment. It was really acted in the European taxonomy as socially non-desirable. It was the same taxonomy that applied for drug and pornography. So you didn't consider to invest in defense because it was not the sector that would raise value, which is completely different right now because we have an increased value of our primes. The question right now, and this is, and I'm sorry because I've been too long to respond to your question, is how we can rearm fast enough, efficiently enough, and how we can transform higher spending into military power. And that's where I would say you have the structural problems that you have to really to take into account. And do you want me to
So what are
pursue
these
on
structural
that?
problems?
So
Yes, please. Like, what are these structural problems? Because it sounds, from what you just
yes.
said, it sounds like
So
everything's great.
no, everything is not great. I wanted to really to recognize the amount of effort and the change of I would say of political mindset on defense, and this is important. And we have seen this in the Ankara summit, the unity of European pillars of NATO, the unity of the alliance itself, and we really have to be satisfied about that. But the major obstacles, and you see my report is quite long, so I will try to really to simplify and to reach the main obstacles. The first one is really what I call the financial paradox, because we've seen that there was a raise of budget. There was public funding has increased significantly. National defense budgets are rising. And the European Union itself has created new financial instruments from the central budget to support defense production, to support innovation, to support joint procurement. But there is one, I think, extremely important and one missing ingredient in this is really the large-scale private capital. Europe has no global market capital. It's not global. It's that there is no European market capital, and there is no even if there is a lot of efforts that have been made, and I would say a change that I also noticed in my report. But globally, right now at this stage, there is a lack of private capital. And this is problematic for, especially for the scale up of startup, for defense innovation and for mass production. Europe is capable to finance research, to finance startups and small companies. But when those companies need hundreds of millions or even billions of euros to industrialize and scale their production, Europe financing remains insufficient. Several reports have shown that there is a need of 800 billions, even more, to be able to rearm completely Europe. And we know that 800 billions are not going to be found in the public budget, because it means sacrificing other expenses, and this is really not the time. So it means that we need to attract private capital. And I would say those that are very active in Europe right now are American and also Asian capital. So it means that as a result, many of the most promising European companies naturally will look to the United States, where venture capital, private equity, institutional investors, and defense financing are much more mature and are looking for markets to invest. Europe will succeed in creating innovation, but will struggle to retain retain this innovation when it comes to the industrialization phase. So that's the first major obstacle. The second challenge is procurement. Europe still has 27 largely separate defense markets, each with its own procurement rules, industrial priorities, and standards. So the result is mostly duplication, small productions, higher cost, and total absence of flexibility to move one company to another country. Of course, every government seeks to, especially when you have much more budget in the game, every government seeks to support its own national defense industry. So there are, of course, initiatives, and especially the financial instrument, which is a flagship of Rearm Europe 2030, which is SAFE, is encouraging joint procurement. SAFE is a program of 150 billions, especially in loans. It's never cash. It's loans, or it's a facility to expand the budget deficit, etc. We are far from fresh money. And so this there are some progress, and we see also joint the success of some joint procurement, like the A400 MBDA missile, or Typhoon, the Eurofighter, etc. So this is important, and there are a lot of bilateral cooperation also in the Baltic states, etc. So I really detail that much more in the report, but I want really to point out the problem of the 27 procurements. And more of it, I think what is equally an important obstacle is that the model of procurement themselves are becoming obsolete. So 27 procurements, and all are obsolete regarding what's happening in Ukraine, regarding the experience in Ukraine that has shown us that military technology evolves in months and not in decades anymore. And if you want to survive, you have to be flexible, agile, and to be ready to adapt very quickly. And this is not empty words. So we have procurements that I would say that are well set up for traditional acquisitional cycles, designed for platforms that will be delivered over 10, 15, 20 years, but they are too slow for a battlefield where drones, software, AI, and electronic warfare are constantly adapting. So this the capacity of integrating the civilian innovation ecosystem is extremely difficult through this process of acquisition and procurement, even though they have become strategically indispensable. So I would say Europe doesn't just need to spend more, it needs to spend together and smarter and quicker. And the third challenge, I would say, is the industrial capacity itself. Europe's defense problem cannot be separated from a broader economic transformation. As highlighted by Mario Draghi's 2024 report, decades of deindustrializations and dependence on global supply chains, particularly on critical technologies and manufacturing capabilities, have created a strategic vulnerability for Europe. And that's a real problem when you consider the lessons learned from Ukraine. And the fundamental lessons, it's not that the warfare is now about drones. The fundamental lessons of Ukraine is the industrial revolution that we have seen on the battlefield. So, and the fact that there is no military power that is not sustained by a very strong industrial power, which is not anymore only defense industrial power, but also civilian. And part of my research is about this question, and I regard the American model, and I see that this is the core of American concern right now. Industry has become a national security asset per se. It's part of the military asset, and we're not talking about the defense industrial base. We're talking about industry in general, because modern warfare depends not only anymore of defense companies, but on a wider ecosystem of manufacturers producing electronics, semiconductors, advanced materials, machine tools, batteries, and dual-wheels technology. So Europe must address what is becoming one of its most significant strategic vulnerabilities, this disindustrialization. And I'm not talking even the the Chinese dominance on European industry, when we see that the car industry, which was one of the strongest point of Europe, has almost disappeared. That's one point. There is also one detail that I want to add is the question of the digital ecosystem, artificial intelligence, but all the digital stack around artificial intelligence, cloud computing, advanced semiconductor, software, data infrastructure, which are now central, even much more than the platform, central to military power. And despite some progress, now I've noticed, for example, the great progress of Mistral AI, for example, but Europe is still very behind the United States, very behind China in these critical technologies. So if we want to be much more self-reliant, much more independent, we have to address this technological gap, which is as much as important as increasing defense budget. So that's why I think European rearmament is not only a defense issue, it's an industrial strategy issue. The decisive question is whether Europe can produce at scale, replenish its stocks, and adapt faster than its adversaries. Still, Ukraine has demonstrated that the winners of future conflicts will not be only those that have the most advanced technologies, but those with the industrial capacity to sustain them over time and the capacity to replenish and to have at the same time a logic of stockpiles and a logic of production on time in the hour when the battlefield is demanding. So that's the three major obstacles. There are a lot of other problems that has to be addressed that I try really to list in this report. And but I think that's the major, the capital, the private capital, joint procurement, and reindustrialization. So reversing the phase where we are right now, which is a complete phase of deindustrialization. So that's really three concepts. Mm-hmm.
I see our time is running out. I do have one last question though, which is that after all is said and done, are you optimistic? Like, will Europe pull this off? You clearly think it can. The question is, will it, or what's the likelihood?
Well, I'm optimistic when I see that in a few years, really, there was such a shift in all the domain I have mentioned first. So I think there is a willingness. And when there is a willingness, and not only when there is a willingness, but when there is Donald Trump asking us to ramp up our capacities on one side, Russia threatening us, I think the willingness is there. So yes, because but where I'm less optimistic is really that and that's exactly what I meant with in my report, in my conclusion, is we don't have time. We don't have so much time, and the window is closing. So the problem is, how can we get rid of this huge amount of bureaucracy that keeps us from evolving? And there are also always the struggle between the national sovereignty questions regarding a global European unity on defense, etc. And it should not be addressed as selfishness against a collective ideal ID. Not at all. I think it's really a question also, where is the efficiency? When France say that through the highest authority, say that it doesn't want the European Commission to be the coordinator and the joint central procurement for. I think it's really this question that is raised. It's not about preserving a national sovereignty only, because defense is national sovereignty, security is national sovereignty, even if together we are stronger. It's really about who is the most efficient to address this. Who is the most efficient to decide what kind of weapons we should acquire and what kind of training we should give to our military, to our soldiers, to our sailors, to our pilots. So, it's really we need to address this question of governance. The question of private capital, I think it will be solved. The problem is when. The money is there. The money is there. Now we have really to activate the private actors and to encourage them to invest in defense. Maybe a point that makes me very positive is that we're coming from a long road where we used to antagonize NATO against EU in defense. And we always, especially in France, we were reluctant against NATO because it would keep us from evolving in a European, much more autonomous defense, etc. And on the UK side, for example, they always have seen European defense as a duplication of NATO. So I think we have all recognized, and especially in this summit, that NATO is the cornerstone of our collective defense. And what is really interesting is to see that now the European efforts are really much integrated as the European pillar for NATO. So it's not about competition. It's on the contrary, it's really being stronger, European being stronger in a stronger NATO. It's really that. So this is positive because we will lose much less energy in this kind of political fight. So that's maybe one thing positive. And NATO is also reorganizing. NATO provides the military framework, the command structures, the operational planning, the interoperability, the standards, and European unions will bring considerable tools that NATO doesn't have: industrial policy, financing, regulation, maybe not too much on that part, infrastructures, investment, especially the question of the military mobility, which has been raised for many, many years and still not solved, has now been budgeted. So there is a budget to improve the infrastructures to be able to address this question, the material question of military mobility. But now we have to address the bureaucratic problem of military mobility, which is, I think, even worse. But that's why I'm positive, and I think that we are in a very positive trend right now, which is satisfying from both sides of the Atlantic, in fact. And I think we can achieve very much more if we keep that trend.
I think that's a great place to conclude. Tsiporah, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. I found it very interesting.
Thank you, Michael, for giving me this opportunity to speak on your great podcast. And I hope that your audience is not already sleeping.
No, don't worry about them. So thank you very much. And those in the audience, please thank you. And of course, if you like this content, please hit like and subscribe. It really, really helps the channel. Also, if you look in the description, besides the fact that I put links for Tsiporah's publications, you can also check out my social media and my own website, michaelschrecken.com, as well as my Substack, Pax Americana, right? The same as the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye-bye.